Oh, yeah. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here on Cream of the Crop, a fantasy hockey podcast presented by Apples and Ginos, the number one fruit-based fantasy hockey podcast out there. It's confirmed. The picture's on the refrigerator. My mom is very proud of me, as she should be, because we're doing stuff out here and it feels good. My name is Blake Creamer. I'll be your host here. Please give me a follow over on X/Twitter at Blake Creamer AG. Also, Blue Sky, all that business. Apples and Ginos has a Discord link in the description. We've also got a YouTube. We're doing stuff. And joining me here today is probably the most handsome fantasy analyst out there. All right.
Okay.
It's Chris from FantasyPuck. This man has a beautiful mustache and a lovely head of hair. Buddy, how you doing today?
I'm great, Blake. We haven't done one of these in a while. This is a new kind of format, so like the mailbag's like new to me. And we typically try to do like some Q&A stuff with the community on like live stream stuff, which is one of my favorite things. Like getting involved with a lot of these guys and their questions. So I'm super pumped for today. I'm excited to be here. Excited to be back with you, baby. Let's get into it.
Oh, right. Now you're speaking my language, man. Yeah, this is good stuff because first off, FantasyPuck, you guys have an awesome Discord as well, and I think you're pretty used to answering kind of mailbag type stuff just through your Discord there. So I knew this would be something that would be like right up your alley. So, and I want to pass that value on to our listeners. Okay, you don't want to hog all the good fantasy goodness over there. All right, Chris, you guys are giving good information. We need to share it over here. All right, but buddy, before we get into this, we are doing a mailbag show, folks. By the way, so yeah, we'll get to your questions here in a second. I put out a call to our Discord, so we got some good stuff on tap. But buddy, how are your seasons going? How's this fantasy season been treating you?
It's been a bit of a mixed bag. I've come under some heat in our FPPL league, which is pretty much just the one that we run through FantasyPuck. So currently in Division 2, and I think my record is like absurdly bad. It's like 2-11 or something like that. Which I would love to like go into like a deep, like I thought for like a content piece would be really cool to like kind of get an analysis from different creators as to like what they would have done differently. But essentially, like I did a look back at my draft that I had for this league, and a lot of the like deep name guys that you like almost have to hit on, I didn't hit on. So it was a lot of like Mika Zibanejad's a great example, who we'll talk about. Like Elias Lindholm, another great example, who we'll talk about, who I have beef to pick with that guy. It was basically just a lot of guys that I got later in my draft that just didn't end up panning out.
Yep.
And my high-end guys as well. Like I started off my first round going Matthew Tkachuk, who he's been a little bit underwhelming this season as well too. So look, I'm getting absolutely torched in that league, but everything else is like solid. Like my in the Creators League, we're like top 5 right now. I think I'm in 4th.
Yeah,
I got a matchup against Dawn this week, so big internal dialogue going back and forth between us. Yeah, I'm 5th right now. Josh and Nate are 2nd and 4th, so it's like that 2 Apples and Gino guys, 2 FantasyPuck guys in the top 5, which is always great. And then I have another big kind of like keeper league that I'm in. That's like a full-blown like goals, assists, power play points, shots, hits, blocks, face-off, PIMs, and then it's a keeper league on top of that, and then 4 goalie cats. And it's a really competitive league, and I love it. And I'm trying to repeat this year after winning last year, so we're in good regard in that situation as well. But how about you? How are your leagues doing? I'm always curious because like it's tough to follow up with people like mid-season and as they get like deeper into different leagues, and depending on how many you've run, you might just be just setting your lineups every week and not really doing too much outside of that. But I'm curious as to where you're at with your stuff.
Yeah, things have actually been going really good, especially the last couple months. In a couple spots, like I'm in 11 leagues, which is just
wow.
That's just obscene, man.
Yeah,
I mean, some of them are Dynasty keeper, which are kind of set and forget. I'm not doing a lot of work. I would say there's probably 6 leagues where I'm like have to be on top of it and make sure I'm streaming properly. But things are going well. I had a really slow start. We have a listener league here too, and I was getting cooked. I actually made a bet. It's a tattoo bet. Loser gets a tattoo from me and one of our listeners. Yeah. So if he loses, and this is just points for, but if he loses, he's going to get the cream of the crop ice cream cone tattooed somewhere in his body, hopefully somewhere suggestive. And then, if I lose, I'm going to get his Discord name is Big Dipper. And he's got like an excavator, like dipping a chip into a big bowl of ranch. So yeah, I'll get that somewhere. And it's funny because we're neck and neck. We're both in the playoffs right now. But yeah, I started out so badly. I'm just like, I'm getting a tattoo. This is terrible, man.
I would be checking the waiver wire every 2 hours if I had a bet like that in fruition. Like that's crazy. Good for you guys though. Yeah, that's kind of sick.
It's funny. It'll be good content. Whoever. I kind of hope I lose, so I have to get the tattoo. I mean, when you have this many tattoos, like it just
I guess it's a little bit different in your case.
It doesn't matter at that point. You know what I mean? I'll just get a tramp stamp and be done with it. But yeah, things are going well. I guess. Long story short, I really feel like I've figured out streaming this year. Like obviously, I know how to stream and I understand the concepts, but like. Yeah, I feel like I'm just locked in. Like
the decisions that you guys are making over others for sure. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like player evaluation and trying to find, like you were saying, some of those diamonds in the rough in season, right? I did hit on some guys in draft season for sure, but it's also kind of finding those guys in season that are, have some potential to do something, right, and have some opportunity. And I feel like I've gotten lucky. Like that's the thing too. When you mentioned your league that you're not doing well in, it's like. There's so much variance in fantasy hockey. We're just trying to put things on our side, but like at the end of the day, the players have to perform, and there's that, there's a mental aspect, there's everything else, stuff that we cannot account for, and yeah, sometimes it just crushes down on us, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we crunched the numbers, and I think when I was like 1-9 at one point, like it was bad, and I was like second in the entire FPPL, like through like 12 different leagues in terms of points against. So not only was my team like not performing to the standard that they normally were, but I was getting hammered every week and like losing by like I didn't understand. I'm like, I genuinely am looking at my team top to bottom. Yep. I'm like, there's no way this team should be that bad. And sometimes you just get unlucky like that, right? And then it's all in good fun though. Like I love the back and forth between like we got in each individual like Discord channels for each of the leagues, and I love the like back and forth banter between like me and some of the guys in the league, and like that's what it's about at the end of the day. It's right. It's like participating in like community based stuff is always been like a passion of mine. So it's fun. Like sometimes there's just nothing you can do, right?
Yeah, that's so true, buddy. And this community that's what we do it for. Honestly, it sounds cheesy, but I'm here to get people dubs. You know what I mean? And I know you guys are that way as well. So it's just at the end of the year, that's my favorite time of the year, honestly. Like when season's done and people are like, I won my league because of you guys. Is like, hell yeah, you did. That's what we're trying to do. Meanwhile, I got like bounced from the first round of the playoffs, but that's fine. As long as you won, I feel like I won. So that's kind of good. But anyways, let's get into business here. You know what? Before we even do that, I did want to ask just your quick thoughts on the Four Nations tournament. You excited about this, or you feel like you're going to watch this, or you're going to sort of take this time to kind of reset and calibrate?
I think for me personally, it's just excited about having international hockey back. It's something that I feel like the game has missed for a multiple end of years now. Like when I see, like I know it's a touchy subject, but even the Russian stuff, like I feel like a lot of the circumstance of like athletes shouldn't be punished for just the fact of like political regards and so on and so forth. I won't get into it too much, but like I miss seeing Russia in like the World Juniors. Like imagine we got to see Demidov this year. There's so many like good talents coming out of that space, but just like international hockey in general, like super excited for Four Nations, especially because like you're getting this circumstance of it's probably the only time maybe that like Crosby and McDavid will play together. Like who knows what's going to happen in like the Olympics and so on and so forth with those coming up. But again, it's just like there's just so many cool opportunities. I'm also fascinated a lot of the time by the roster construction. Like I think it's very interesting to see the way like these GMs kind of build these teams where you could have like essentially unlimited star power on your team, right? Like a little bit different probably with like Finland, for example, where they're a little bit limited in terms of the depth of their roster. But then you've still got guys like Aho, Rantanen, Barkov. Like
they might surprise in there too.
You know what I mean? Like I don't think they're bad in any way. And like it really sucks not having Heiskanen in there anymore. Like that's obviously like a huge type of loss. But one of the best defenders in like the league in general. But I'm just excited to see like international hockey and best on best hockey again.
Buddy, Finland has Kevin Lankinen. They're good to go. It doesn't matter. This guy's a legend. But yeah, it is interesting. I was reading an article today on The Athletic about sort of like these teams have so many centers. Like the majority of the players on these teams are centers. So they're going to have to play wing. Someone's going to have to play wing. And, whereas a team like Finland, I don't know, maybe they can construct their roster in a different way that makes sense, right? Because you're going to have superstars on like line 4. You know, it's really exactly. Weird. Like everyone's gonna have to play a role. Anyways, we don't need to get too much into that. We got a bunch of questions here on tap, but I'm interested in it. I'm also very much looking forward to the break. Like it's just coordination stuff is not anything I've looked into at this point. So it's like, you know, Nate and I are going to try and put some content together during that time. But yeah, it'll be like sort of the first time for me. I've seen the rosters and I'm excited to watch it, but I don't know. Fantasy hockey is king. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Like we just me and a couple of my buddies are there's like 6 or 7 of us that are just going to do like a little kind of like fantasy draft for it as well too, which I think it'll be really cool to like just see like where people's heads are at. Like, oh, I'm going to take like Jack Hughes first overall because I think the US is going to be lights out or something like that, right? So just always interesting to see that aspect of like, you don't get to do this on a regular basis. It's once in a while type of thing. So just being able to enjoy it while it's here, you know?
Absolutely, buddy. Well, I hope it's a really good event, and they kind of carried on moving forward because that All-Star game is ridiculous. I just keep thinking of Nikita Kucherov, like just dinking around out there, buddy. Like, man, come on,
that Russian team would be so fun to watch too.
Oh yeah, like, well, even Draisaitl, he's not there. Like, how is it best on best if Draisaitl's not there? I don't understand.
I know. I think they missed out in doing like a team Europe type of vibe or something like that. You know, like they have to find a way to get these kind of miscellaneous players that don't have like full NHL capability rosters to like be involved in some capacity, right? Because they're the biggest stars in the game. Like you said, not having Draisaitl there is insane, right?
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what, buddy. Chris and I, we're gonna craft a strongly worded email. We're gonna send it off to the powers that be, and then we'll wait, you know, for the changes to come. You think that'll work, Chris?
If it's anything like the Discord messages I get out of you, Blake, it's very convincing stuff. So I have confidence in that.
Sweet, buddy. What a nice guy. All right, let's get to business. Are you ready to take some mailbag questions, my man?
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
Oh yeah. All right. Starting off, Mango Snapple T from our Discord says, "Who's a player from your initial projections that you had high hopes for, but has severely let you down?" And then also the reverse as well. So we're looking for players that we were, little to no expectations, but they've had a great season. And I'll kick to you first here, Chris, if you got any sort of players in mind.
Yeah, I think just 2 of them really fly off the top of my head. Like I mentioned, like Matthew Tkachuk earlier. I'm not going to say he's one of them because at the end of the day, he's still over a point a game player. It's just differentiating whether you want to take him in the first or second round. But I think for us, like the 2 that really stand out, number 1 is Elias Lindholm. We had him projected for around 70 points. And even like looking at that, like in the moment, like it actually like created a little bit of a discussion I brought up to them because I personally wasn't as bullish on that. Like I would have probably had him in like the 60-point range, which at the end of the day isn't that big of a difference. But a lot of the guys from the FantasyPuck side were super excited for him. Obviously had the opportunity to play alongside like Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak. And it's not like he doesn't like do well when he's surrounded with elite talent either, right? I just expected him to be like not as bad as what he is, because you look at his peripheral stats as well too. Like one of the better blocking forwards in the league, if you count blocks. Doesn't really do like move the needle too much in terms of shots or hits, but at least it's like solid enough as a category to where like if he produces and gets a lot of power play one time and really gets into that mix to where like now you're seeing it with like Zaka and Geeky, where it's like just because passes on your line, you're absolutely popping off. Right. And so we looked at all these deep centers, and he was like right around the same ADP as like a guy like Scheifele. And we're just thinking like, okay, like Scheifele, we know what he is. He's like around 65, 70 points, you know, doesn't really do too much in terms of like the shot volume. And then all of a sudden, like he's popped off.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess that's kind of the reverse of that as well, too. It's like there's just so many different things that can happen within a round of drafting that can just completely change the entire outcome. So another one for me that's kind of been like a really bad letdown is Juraj Slafkovsky. I looked at the second half of last season and I was like, okay, Montreal's found their mix. Like he's starting to kind of grow into his shell a little bit. He's imposing himself physically. Like he's really just starting to come along as like a prospect. And that top line of him, Suzuki, Caulfield looked absolutely lights out towards the end of like last season going into next year.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, just like looking at the peripheral stats again, like this guy could have been like Brady Tkachuk light just with the shot, hit, and block mix, right? Like there's very few players in the league that can get you like extremely high rates across all 3 of those categories and get you some scoring upside and place power play 1, right? So I'm like, okay, like going into the season, if you can get this guy anywhere within like round, 8 through 10 even, we probably went a little bit earlier just because of how much we were hyping him up in some cases. But like I was super excited to see him kind of like break out as like a true like number one overall pick talent that we haven't seen out of them yet. And then it's just been like an absolute nosedive this season. And I don't know if that's with them bringing in Line A and like he's been a completely different story over the past 5 games than like the previous 10. But I had a lot higher expectations in his regard as well. And then my last one for the reverse, like little to no expectation, but then had a fantastic season. I like Zach Werenski. Like we were really high on him to begin with because we loved the kind of like shot volume that he was presenting on a regular basis and always had good rates offensively. But man, like this season, he looks like he's like Roman Yossi from 2 years ago, right? Like Columbus is like what first in goals for per game right now across the entire National Hockey League. Like they're just absolutely lights out, and then they've gone through a couple injuries right now. But man, like just watching the games too, like Werenski looks like he's just carrying the team on his back. Like some nights he had like upwards of like 9 shots and like 2 points, one of the power play with like 3 blocks. And you're just like, I got this guy in the 10th round. Like this is a joke, right?
Oh man, I love that. I love the Werenski shout out. Like this is a guy that we were high on as well. I think I projected him for 60 points, but like 20 goals. So I feel like he's a 20 goal threat from the back end, and he's showing that this year. Yeah. But it's interesting what happened with Columbus there. Like obviously the tragic passing of Gaudreau, and then all the injuries and everything else that's gone on with this team. Like pretty much the worst luck team in the entire NHL, and they're still doing the thing somehow. And I feel like with everything that's gone on there, Werenski is the guy who is just driving the bus. Like, just massive injuries, Boone Jenner, even Goodbranson, like guys that are taking minutes there, they're leaders on the team, they're out, right? So this guy has put the team on his back, and he's healthy for once, and he's just crushing this year. Like he's driving everything there, isn't he? Like just nutty stuff with him. And then what was I going to say? I like your Elias Lindholm as well. That's a guy I had earmarked as well. I projected him for 71 points. But yeah, on pace for 43. Buddy, that's showing no good. Oh, God. But I saw him here in Vancouver, and I was actually pretty stoked. Obviously, I thought he was playing injured when he did get traded to Vancouver from Calgary there. Yeah. And then, he played amazing in the playoffs, like amazing. He was one of our best players. So I thought going to, a center-starved team with the Boston Bruins, he was really going to eat. And he's just played poorly. There's no way around that there. Like even digging in on some of his metrics, it's just he's shooting less. His IPP is down. It just doesn't look good. He's kind of, it seems like he's going through the motions there a little bit, and they haven't really been able to find any traction there. And now that Zaka and Geeky are playing so well with Pasternak, like it's, he's not going to have a sniff with that. So
I know.
Yeah, I'm with you there. A couple of the guys that I had here just on my list, Mike Matheson. That was a player too that I think it's more opportunity based than the actual player, but that's a guy I projected for 61 points, and he's on pace for 38. Okay, that's not good, right? And to me, I really didn't see Lane Hudson cutting into Matheson's power play time as early as this season. Definitely next season, but this season I really was expecting Matheson to run house there, run that power play, and get the biz. Like this, Matheson is an amazing skater. He's a great offensive generator, great shooter, and he's kind of been asked to take a back seat and let Lane Hudson cook offensively. And that's been working. I mean, obviously Montreal, they had a really good stretch there a little while ago. They haven't been playing well as of late, but I think Lane Hudson's success is a lot due to Mike Matheson kind of holding down the fort while Lane Hudson does his thing. So, I mean, he's still a valuable player in real life, Matheson, but for fantasy, like he's not going to 61 points if he can't get on power play 1. So that stinks. Elias Pettersson I won't talk about him too much, but geez. I mean, damn, I projected him for 90 points. He's on pace for 56. I think that with Miller out of the picture here, I do think that Petey is going to get better than what he's doing here, obviously, but it's been pretty gross even since Miller's left. Like he's lifeless out there. When your best players are like your third and fourth line and you're trying to win like that's a tough place to be. This guy's making $11 million. He's got to be the best player on the ice, and for sure that just hasn't been the case. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about Elias Pettersson? Do you think that he can sort of bounce back a little bit without Miller?
I think he's talented enough to do it. Like, I still think that there's somewhere in there where he's a 95, 100-point player that can score 40 goals with, like, a 50% shooting percentage. Also, one of the highest blocking forwards on a regular basis, like, really strong defensively, like, decent enough in the dot. Like, I think his face-off percentage is around, like, 50, 45%, which is, like, pretty solid. Nothing crazy, but, like, I think you can build a team around him I don't know how I feel that he's going to produce now because JT Miller was such a powerful presence on that power play as well.
Yeah.
Like one of the better like power play producing forwards. Also brought an element to the team that I don't think a lot of teams have that's super underrated. But again, like I'm still picking Pettersson over Miller when it comes to like moving a guy off my team. Just again, given the age, like he's still just 26 years old, right? Like he could just be hitting his prime in the next couple seasons. And then you've got Quinn Hughes. I look at the situation of like what's happening with Besser and that whole team, and it's like, okay, where is your talent now? Yeah. Right? Like you're really thin across your lineup in terms of depth. I'm not confident in like saying like, okay, like your first line, Jake DeBrusk, Elias Patterson, like Brock Besser or Connor Garland even. And then like your second line is like, again, it's like Chytil, Sherwood, Garland, or Hogland or Garland. Like it just seems like their depth has like suddenly evaporated just by moving out that one piece. So it's like Petty really has to be the catalyst. Him and Quinn Hughes, obviously, who's just been phenomenal. But I think they definitely lack scoring, and I think they definitely lack some star power all of a sudden. Just looking at the roster from a top down perspective.
Yep. No, that's an interesting take for sure. I do like the additions of Chytil and Drew O'Connor here, just in terms of the speed they bring. That's something that was sorely lacking for the Canucks, just a rush offense in general. But, Chytil, he's up there with Marty Necas in terms of, like, if you look at NHL Edge stats, like in terms of speed burst, 22 miles per hour and up. Filip Chytil's up there. He's doing that. He's an old dancing boy. He's zipping around out there going crazy. And Drew O'Connor is a very good skater as well. So anyways, I don't want to dive too deep on the Canucks. Just a couple quick surprises here, then I'll move on. Kirill Marchenko, that's a guy huge. Unbelievable. I project him for 49. He's on pace for 85. What the hell? I mean,
great.
He's always been an amazing player, but he was getting some garbage treatment from his previous coaches. And Dean Evison there in Columbus really has been a net positive. He's letting these offensive players cook. Guys like Voronkov, guys like Kent Johnson. These guys are eating. Adam Fantilli. It's a good situation there. So bad luck that he broke his jaw on the bench.
Yeah, Damn. that's crazy. When I heard about that, I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
I know, man. I got this guy in 3 spots. Like, isn't that funny? How, like, are you like this with fantasy hockey too? A guy gets injured, you're like, damn it, my hockey team. And meanwhile, this guy's like has a broken jaw. He's getting a plate inserted. We're like,
dude,
get back out on the ice.
The only thing I care about, like, stick a cage on and get out there.
Buddy, what are you doing? Yeah, just ridiculous. Just no heart, no soul with these fantasy hockey GMs, and that's fine. Ricard Raquel's another one I just wanted to shout out. Projected him for 41. He's on pace for 70. That's crazy. I mean,
that's a big upgrade.
The Pittsburgh power play was so bad last year. So I mean,
terrible.
I knew that was going to be better, and it is. And Raquel's been on it, and he's been eating there. So, shout out to those players. Let's move on to the next question here. Next one: would it be smart to trade for slightly lower rated players? Example being Josh Morrissey for Mo Seider or Ricard Raquel for DeBrincat, when your guaranteed playoffs? Is having an extra 2 to 3 games at the end of the week more beneficial for playoff runs? And this is an interesting question. I'm excited to get your take here, Chris, just in terms of how you approach your playoffs. And what is your strategy going into playoffs? Are you making these type of trades?
I think if it's similar value, like if you can trade a guy like a Seider or Morrissey and get back somebody more or less of equal value, it just depends on what you're looking for. Like if you're in a categories league, for example, it's a little bit different because like you obviously want to address certain categories to like win your league and so on and so forth.
Yep.
But when it comes to points leagues, as long as they're more or less equal value in terms of like point per game average and like what exactly like fits the build of your league, you always want to have guys that are 2 to 3 extra games. Where I don't typically make these decisions is when it comes to like really high end players. So let's say, for example, I have I don't know, take any, but let's say I have Kirill Kaprizov, for example, right? Like he's injured. Does he might have like a decent playoff schedule depending on when you have your situation, or you might have a really shit schedule. But at the end of the day, it's like, I'm not going to move that guy for a comparable that just has like, because you just can't make that trade a lot of the time, right? And I just don't think that like you trading away a player that could potentially be better within that span for an extra 1 to 2 games is like good value for me. So I'm a little bit more like quantity over quality, but in terms of like the mid-tier level players, like what Mellow Jello is talking about here, where it's like the guys like Raquel for DeBrincat are really good options where you can snag a couple extra games for your playoff schedule. And I always look to do that every single year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it helps if you're doing like buy lows and sell highs, right? Get a guy who's underperforming a little bit, get rid of a guy who's overperforming. But yeah, to me, like we had lots of questions like this. We're going to do a playoff primer as well coming up here soon, Apples and Ginos. But I feel like people focus a little bit too much on this type of stuff come playoff time, like making trades, getting these players with great playoff schedules. Like obviously we need to maximize their schedule, but to me, if you're trading away guys that are active contributors to your roster, like those are the guys that helped get you there, right? So they're going to be on your roster anyway, like during those weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to understand the benefit of just getting like one or two more games.
Like if I like Jake Gensel, for example, and he's having a really good year, like I'm not moving him just to acquire an extra couple games for a guy that could potentially produce at a lower rate. And that's where I think like you need to make a decision on like just being confident in your premium players. And unless you're getting like really good value for those guys, like I don't like to typically trade quality for depth a lot of the time. But when you're forced into it, it's a different circumstance. But I'm not looking to just like swap out every single player just so I have like the best playoff schedule, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, that's a good way to put that. I mean, to me, I'd be more inclined to try and nab like a big fish with a great schedule by doing like a 2-for-1 or something like that. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather go that way. I'd get like a quality guy as opposed to getting rid of like a higher performer for like two lower performers that have a good schedule. So I think we're on the same page there. Next question here, kind of similar to that one. Eccles says, regarding playoffs, is it a wise strategy to drop an underperforming drafted player you may have been hoping is going to turn it up, but consistently hasn't, to stream a lower ranked player that has a better playoff schedule and is on a hot streak, if not planning to keep for next season? So what do you think about that? That's a little bit different. It's talking about like a player you drafted and when to sort of get off a player in terms of your playoff prep.
Yeah, this one's tough, and this is probably like some of the decisions that either make or break your fantasy year. Like a perfect example this year, like in the league that I was struggling in when I was like 1-9, I ended up dropping Lane Hudson because at the time, like his peripherals weren't good enough to justify rostering. There were better defensemen available, and then all of a sudden, as soon as I drop him, he starts popping off and plays power play 1 and just goes on this ridiculous point streak. Right, so it's like if I employed a little bit more patience in that, and our policy a lot of the time at FantasyPuck is if you have a good quality player, like be as patient as you possibly can with him. And so even when it's like you have an underperforming drafted player and you're looking to kind of like get a better playoff schedule on a hot streak, it's like, yeah, like that could work out for you. But at the end of the day, it depends on the player. And I think that context is very important. Like you're obviously not going to drop a guy that's, 70 to 80 to 90% rostered just to pick up a guy because you can get him for 2 extra games that's like 30% rostered and he scored a couple points in his last 5. So just be careful of the recency bias, I would say, and it's pretty situational when it comes to that, at least in my mind.
Yep, I like that recency bias. That's so true, and that's something that happens with a lot of fantasy managers. I feel like this is my 4th year or 5th year of taking fantasy pretty seriously, and I feel like this year more than any other year, I've been able to be patient. I've been able to just ride it through. Like I was talking about that team that was kind of getting demoed there, and I've been able to rattle off like 6 straight wins. You know what I mean? So I trusted my players, and like that brings me to my point here, like. I think that you have to do an assessment of the player that you're trying to, maybe get off of, right? And the things we look at here at Apples and Ginos, metrics, deployment, and opportunity, right? If you want to assess those things, and at least then you can make an informed decision about getting off a player, right? Because getting off a player with a good schedule, it's always wise, sure. Or getting a player that is on a good schedule is always wise, but not at the cost of getting rid of a guy that's ready to pop for fantasy, right? So I don't know if that changes too. If you need to win or you're gone, like you're not in the playoff picture, right? Then all bets are off. You got to be ruthless, right? Anyone's expendable, but that brings up an interesting point too that I want to get your take on here, Chris. Like just in draft season, what do you do in draft season when it comes to schedules? Like, are you avoiding players with bad playoff schedules in your drafts?
No, never. I think if you're tailoring your draft around the year's upcoming draft schedule or playoff schedule, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Simply because, like, number one, like you want to take the best player available at a lot of the time. And if you're skipping over specific players that you feel really good about going off this season just to get a guy that, again, plays an extra couple games, like, I don't agree with that philosophy at all. I think that's a little bit of an extreme circumstance. The times where I feel like you are supposed to do it, and that's kind of why we have so many trade target videos oriented around playoff time, is around the playoffs, is around before your trade deadline. So you can look at your team and be like, okay, here's where I can upgrade. I can get an extra couple games on top of that while still getting a better player in this deal, is where like I think you should be looking to kind of make your upgrades at that point. Because again, like if I have the option to choose between like Brady Tkachuk and let's say Matthew Tkachuk this year, for example, it's like, okay, two very similar players. Which one do I like more? And do I really care about an extra 1 to 2 games or like an off night during playoffs? It's like, no, it's like, I think Brady's going off this year. He's an absolute mutant. Let me take him over Matthew, etc. Right?
Yep, that makes sense to me. I think we're in agreement there as well. Like so many things can change during the fantasy hockey season,
Exactly.
right? Guys get traded, so you're making some like galaxy brain decision in your draft. And then it's like that player gets traded to a team that has an amazing fantasy schedule. It's like, what the hell did I just do? I don't know. So yeah, don't do that. All right. Be like Blake and Chris. All right. That's how we get the biz. Let's move on to the next question here. Glitch in the Matrix. Oh, wow. You ever see the Matrix, my man? Is that
of course
before your time? Okay.
Classic.
Sweet. Yeah, absolutely. I remember seeing it in the theater, and me and my buddy were so jacked up. We're just like, we wanted to watch it again. Yeah, we're just high-fiving each other, out the door. Anyways, I don't know where I'm going with that. The question is, has scheduling from the NHL been worse this season compared to previous ones? This is a quick question, but I don't know. Like, what have you noticed so far? Like, when we do our waiver shows, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well, like, it does feel like there's less weeks where we can actually do things. It's like, well, we don't have the, the Monday, Wednesday off nights. We don't have the Friday, Sunday off nights. It's like, what can we do here? Like,
I think it's a little bit of the NHL trying to avoid the NFL, especially this point of the year. Like, it's very noticeable. Like, just with like NFL playoffs and Super Bowl and everything like around that. And as that kind of like finishes off, then it's like, okay, it goes back to the regular, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday type of vibe that the NHL likes to have in terms of their busy nights. Then you get those off nights throughout the season. And then the other thing is Four Nations. It's right. It's like almost two pack-a-punched into one, where you've got like Four Nations and Super Bowl within a span of like 2-3 weeks, right? So it's like you kind of have to tailor yourself around those things, and the NHL seems to do that versus like an all-star game where it's just like over the course of a weekend and players get like a week off, right? So it kind of like elongates it a little bit, but I think it's just the circumstance of what's happening this year.
Yeah. I mean, we're the NHL. Like, we're just happy to be here, folks. All right. We're not these big, NFL, NBA. No. All right. We're the redheaded stepchild of the sports world. And that's coming from a redheaded stepchild. All right. So there you go. But I mean, that, to that point, though, with these bad schedules, I think that's what makes drafting and player evaluation so important. I think you can really make a difference, with the good, like, that's why you listen to this podcast, why you watch FantasyPuck, because we're going to help you in your drafts, right? And that you can really make some hay there. So that's my 2 cents on that. Let's move on to the next question. Kendrick D33 says, what are some of your top buy lows going into the Four Nations? And then also is asking for a quick Four Nations prediction. I'll give you mine real quick. Canada. All right, that's my prediction. All right, we do that up here. All right, it feels good. Actually, U.S. looks like an absolute wagon this year, but
dude, yeah,
I don't know what's going on. Hopefully, Quinn Hughes is back, because I want to see him play. I mean, Crosby, I hope he's back. Like, it's going to be really fun.
Yeah,
but
does Canada have Sidney Crosby? Yes or no? Kind of makes a lot of a lot of sense.
If they do, I mean, he's not at full strength, right? Like, the little, like, he got his elbow hyperextended is what it looked like to me. So
yeah, like, I think, and I was listening to 32 Thoughts, and Elliot had a similar take to where, like, if there's one guy that should have at the end of the day the jurisdiction to make a decision and play for this and it not necessarily impact the NHL team, it should be Sid.
Yeah, they're not in the playoffs. Like,
exactly. It's like Pittsburgh is nowhere near. They're looking at like doing a potential fire sale. Like, it's not going to make or break your season if this guy goes and plays in this tournament if he's not 100%. And ultimately, it should be his decision, because if there's one person that should have the absolute authority to make his own decision in this case, it's Sid. So
absolutely, buddy. All right, give me some of your buy lows. Who are some buy lows that you're sort of targeting going into the Four Nations here?
I think right now the number one guy on my list, and again, a little bit of recency bias, but like, things like this only pop up every once in a while. I think you should be absolutely targeting Mikko Rantanen right now. Right. I think people are panicking on him. He's now all of a sudden dual eligible. He's left wing and right wing. He is one of the consistent and best scorers in the National Hockey League on a yearly basis. He's going through a slump on a new team. People are like starting to freak out about the fact that he's got like 2 points so far if you've actually gone and watched the games, you would realize how snake bitten he's been. Also, like he seems to be all over it. He's just getting a little bit unlucky. And I think going into Four Nations, like him playing alongside Sebastian Aho, they're going to create a lot of chemistry in a different environment that's like outside of their team, and then they're going to bring that back into Carolina, and I think he's going to be just fine. Like I think it's one of the only times during the year where a guy like that is made available. Very similar to like a lot of early season trades that you see, like buy lows in the first couple weeks of the NHL, where it's like some superstar player doesn't, like Austin Matthews was a good example this year. Like he was injured on and off, wasn't performing a lot. We got a lot of questions about trading him and what to do with him. And this is why we always preach patience in this circumstance. It's like you look at the quality of player and the draft pick that was allocated to him at the beginning of the year. It's very rare for somebody that you take in like the first 8 picks of the draft that aren't going to end up being, a top 10 player, right? So Rantanen is my number one right now. He is a guy that I'm looking to get in every single league that I'm trying to be competitive in. I think he's worth every penny at that point, and whatever you can do to get a high end player like that is always a big one for me.
I love that, buddy. I don't know that there's a better answer than that, honestly. That's I had Rantanen in my list here as well. Like even just digging in really quick on some of his 5-on-5 numbers with Carolina compared to when he was with Colorado. Like his shots on goal per 60 is up by 3 shots at 5-on-5. So he's shooting more with Carolina, okay? Because they do that, right? They chuck pucks, but he's hitting the net. That's fine. Shooting percentage way down, obviously. Scoring chances for up, right? But his shooting percentage and his on-ice shooting percentage down. So this is a classic buy low stuff. He hasn't forgotten how to play hockey. This is still the same player. He's getting, obviously we know about Rod Brindamore's style and how he toots in fantasy hockey managers' faces all the time with his deployments. But Rantanen's not, he's not falling a victim to that. Him and Aho are 20-minute a night guys. So that's no problem there. It's going to come for sure. If you can get your hands on Rantanen, that's a dunk. That's an absolute dunk. Because this team is going to be pretty good. They're a bit snake bit as a team, right? They're finishing, on the Hurricanes. It's not great, right? And I think when you get a guy of Rantanen's caliber, that's going to start to go up. So I'm big on that. I do want to shout out Nick Suzuki. That's a player that I'm interested in. I've got some other ones: Sam Bennett, Barrett Hayton, Zach Hyman, all players that I think are potential buy lows. But Nick Suzuki, I like him because of his playoff schedule. He's got a good playoff schedule. This is a weird one. It doesn't really show out in the statistics that we look at here, like individual offensive generation. So individual shots, individual scoring chances for, but he's really, really good at setting up his teammates, right? And creating offense for his teammates. And he also plays a ton. And I think he's really gettable, right? This is a guy that is not really on people's radar, but I mean, they have a great schedule. Montreal in weeks 22, 24, Montreal plays 11 games with 3 off nights. So you're getting a bunch of games out of Nick Suzuki. He's going to be in your lineup, so I don't think the off nights matter there. They play 11 games, and this guy's going to be one of the guys that's making your roster. So I traded for Nick Suzuki in one spot, and I was pretty stoked about it, and it didn't really cost me that much at all. So I definitely want to shout him out, and I do want to quickly shout out Sam Bennett as well. It's not exactly a buy low. He has 4 points in his last 5 games, but the metrics are popping off the page. This guy's going nuts. Like
Mike loves Sam Bennett too. Like he's on him every single year just because of the peripherals and the kind of like point rates and stuff like that. It's been a little slow this year, but hopefully he kind of turns it around because his peripherals are just so good from like a hit shots perspective. Yeah,
I mean, he's a chucker, right? This guy, he can't hit the broadside of a barn, buddy. Put the biscuit in the basket, please. Okay, but last 5 games, second on shots and goal per 60, first overall in the NHL in individual scoring chances generated for Sam B. All right, he's doing that. So, I mean, I think that's a guy. I think he's only 51% roster or something like that. So that's a player of interest for me that I'd be looking to target moving forward. Okay. All right. Let's move on. We got my buddy Guggs from the Discord says, what do you think of Filip Chytil being the new 1C over Petey? I don't know that he's the 1C, my man, but
is this a serious question?
God, I mean, he almost could be, for God's sake, the way Petey's playing, but no. I do like Filip Chytil, though. I'm into it for sure. Like, I thought for sure that if he got power play 1 and kind of 17 to 19 minutes average time on ice, that's an ad to me. That's enough for this guy to be absolutely fantasy relevant and probably on a roster. So, and he's getting power play 1. He's had 2 games over 20 minutes. 1 game was just 19 minutes. So you got to temper expectations when a guy goes to a new team. But this is the situation that I like, when a guy goes from a third line, second power play on one team, which is the Rangers, to now the Canucks, where he's top 6 power play 1 playing 20 minutes. That you got to take notice of that. And this is a guy that we've liked for a long time with the underlying metrics. He's a really good shooter, great offensive generator. Like I'm stoked on Filipino. If he keeps power play 1, I think, we could have like a 60-point pace even moving forward. Like that's kind of the level that I see Filipino at for the rest of the season. What about you?
Yeah, like I think the big exciting thing with him is, like you said, we haven't really seen him in the top 6 role. He's been playing more or less third line minutes his entire career. He had a good season in 2022-23, just looking at his stats right now, where he had 45 points in 74 games, and that he was averaging still under 15 minutes at that time. I don't think that there will ever be a circumstance where he's actually the true 1C. I think that you have to remember the circumstance of the fact that Vancouver chose to trade JT Miller over Elias Pettersson. Yes, you get Chytil back in this deal. There's just not a circumstance that I could foresee that you would want to give that guy more offensive tools to work with than a guy like Pettersson, especially if you're trying to get Petty going. But I'm still excited to see him in a top 6 role. I'm curious. He might be like one of these kind of second half of the season guys that just find the opportunity to pop off, and then going into next year, he's super late in your draft. I think Adam Fantilli is another good example of that. I was super high on Fantilli this year because I'm okay, there's nobody stopping him from being in a line 1 center role. And then all of a sudden they put Monahan there, and he's just kind of piggybacked off of Marchenko. And then with Marchenko being out now, Fantilli's still now that he's getting over 16 minutes average time on ice consistently and playing upwards of 18, 19 minutes, he's got 15 points in his last 15 games. He's been absolutely popping off. So it was only a matter of time for him a little bit late in the season. It made me look a little bit silly for suggesting him as a potential breakout candidate, but I just didn't anticipate Columbus being okay, we're going to put Monahan ahead of you, and because he's your franchise center essentially, right? So, but back on Chytil, sorry I digressed a little bit. I think we just keep an eye on him. I definitely think if he continues, I would probably want a little bit more sample size before I potentially make an ad, unless you're just planning on streaming him. But averaging over 20 minutes in the last 3 games that he's played is massive. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
You bet your sweet bippy, buddy. That's how Filipino gets the biz. And, speaking of bippies, the next question here, Steve gets it done. What exactly is a sweet bippy, and why are you so quick to risk it all? Steve, that's none of your damn business. I thank you to stay out of my personal affairs. Chris, do you know what a sweet bippy is? You know what I'm talking about here?
I had to Google this one. I don't know if this is exactly what the origination is from, but you bet your sweet bippy means you can be certain about that. It originates from a late 60s television show called Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. I don't know what that is. I don't know if you know what that is.
You know what? No, maybe I saw it when I was 2 or something, and it just seeped in. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah I love that you Googled this, my man. I
was so curious. I'm just what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it means you can be absolutely certain, and that's what we deal with here in fantasy hockey, isn't it, Chris? Certainty. All right, what we tell you is certainly going to be true. Am I right?
Yeah. Always, every time.
Book that. Okay. All right. That's also, the bippy part, that's actually it's a nonsensical word often interpreted as referring to a person's backside. All right, so
sure.
we're talking about bums, folks. All right, this is great podcasting. Thank you, Chris. All right, let's move on. Nestle Swolehouse, awesome Discord name. Looking for some early late week streamers for week 20. He has a playoff spot locked up with no bye week, so he's looking to get a head start on streamers. 12-team points league. I threw the stuff in there. It's a basic points league with a little bit of peripheral weighting, hits and blocks, shorthanded points. So, good news is week 20 is a great week for streaming. I dug in on that a little bit. There's only 2, quote unquote heavy nights, and they're only 10-game nights. So it's going to be a great week. Washington has 4 games, 4 off nights. Anaheim, Chicago, LA, New York all have 4 and 3 off nights. So I don't know. How do you approach those type of weeks, those amazing streaming weeks that we haven't had too much? Are you looking at kind of a week-long stream, Chris, or are you kind of trying to maximize your games, with back-to-backs?
Yeah, I think it depends on, first of all, how many ads you have available to your league. I play in a league where my big kind of keeper league is you get 2 ads per week. It's also delayed. So it's you have to pick somebody up for the following day. You can't instantly grab them and drop them. And then the drop is also a day delayed as well too. So you kind of have to which is super annoying, but you kind of have to plan around that moving forward. Typically what I do is I will take just far and away the best option. Like you mentioned, Washington, I think that's a really good shout. There's a lot of like pretty decent guys as well too that have some really high scoring rates. Like Alexei Protas, for example, has been for whatever reason unbelievable in terms of his scoring rates. For also some other reason, he doesn't have any power play time on the season, which is mind-boggling to me for a guy that has like 40 points on the year. But yeah, again, guys like Dubois, Connor McMichael's been great this year. I mentioned Protas, obviously. And then there's some good kind of like peripheral defensemen that I would look at as well. Guys like Matt Roy, Martin Fehervary, if you're in like a hits blocks, which like you do count, right, at the end of the day, but it's primarily scoring based. But you won't be able to get like a top-end defenseman. I wouldn't probably recommend Rasmus Sandin, but anybody from the Caps essentially, and they've been such a good team this year and so consistent that you could probably snag at least one or two of these guys if they're available, and then just use that as kind of like your springboard for that week. If you find that like have like droppable players or guys that like aren't necessarily like high end guys that you would rather get the extra 3 off nights. I also try to look at what my team looks like from a scheduling perspective and be like, okay, can I even fit these guys? Like where exactly positionally do I need to add somebody? Do I need a right winger? Do I need a center? Do I need a defenseman? And so on. And then kind of just go from that point. If I'm looking that far into the future, you want to make sure everything more or less like meshes.
Yeah, for sure. Martin, how do you say that man's name?
Fehervary.
Is that how you say it? Because Nate and I go back and forth on this, and we've kind of landed on Fehervary. We just say it like that. Yeah, we don't even. Yeah, we don't even.
That better, honestly.
It's Martin. You got to put your hand over your mouth like Fehervary. Like yeah, exactly.
Martin Ferrari.
Yeah, then you don't. Yeah, Martin Ferrari. Oh my God, I'm taking that, Chris. I'm sorry.
All
right. Yeah, that's. I'll trademark that. I'll give you some royalties on that. But yeah, it's Martin Ferrari. Moving forward, book it. What was I going to say? Yeah, for me with these type of weeks when there's like the 2 heavy nights or 10-game nights, you might be able to get players in on that night. So to your point, Chris, yeah, you got to set your lineup in that week, see where the holes are, and plug them up. Right. When you got good weeks like this, where you don't have to focus on the off nights, you focus more on actual games played. Right. Sure. You utilize the back-to-backs, maximize your moves. You shouldn't have anyone on your bench in a week like this. So definitely check that out. I do want to shout out as well, Utah. What the hell is their name going to be? The Utah. Where are you at with this? Is it?
I honestly think that if it's between, I think it's Outlaws and Mammoth. They can't go wrong.
Hockey club, right? So yeah, that's in there too.
I'm not in love with the hockey club type thing. Just because I'm super into like branding and logos and stuff, and I've seen some renders that the Mammoth have with like they look super cool, and I love the colorway that they have. Like I definitely think they should keep the colors. But I'm good with either Mammoth or Outlaws. Like those are pretty sweet.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I think I'm leaning towards Outlaw, but in terms of the logo, the hockey club logo to me is the best one. It's like those mountains with like the weird Yeti, I think, looking to the side there. I think that's the best logo, but hockey club, what the hell? No, of course we know it's a hockey club, you ding-dongs. We want to have something mean like a prehistoric beast, all right? Anyways, Utah, back to week 20. They're the team with the least amount of games. They play 2 games with 1 off night. So, I mean, you could probably move away from your streamer level guys on Utah for that week, okay? Let's move on. All right, next question. Some ding dong named Nate says, "Can you ask Chris who has the most fantasy points in the Content Creators League?" Can you confirm or deny this, Chris? Is this information available?
I can confirm that. If Nate wants to pretend that that he's just so far ahead of everybody else because he wakes up at 3 a.m. and streams 3 players on the most optimal night every single night, dude, him and Josh are insane. It's 3 a.m. every night. It's like they have some type of automated AI system, Blake. I don't know if you can confirm nor deny that.
No, I can actually. Have you seen Terminator 2? Do you know like Cyberdyne Systems? Like they're kind of working on like a like the robots are gaining sentience and they basically wake up and just pick their picks for them so they can sleep soundly in their beds. That's kind of what's
honestly like I wouldn't be surprised. Like they are dialed on this every single week. Like sometimes I have to look into next week in the current week in order to like get ahead of them at some point, which I've started to do just to kind of like mess with them. But no, Nathan is 10-7. I'm 9-8. So like I don't know why he's really saying that like he's far and above everybody everybody else. But
He's smug. He's very smug.
Honestly, though, like I love one of my favorite things about the Creator League is going back and listening to people's opinions on like where players are taken, like in post draft. And Nate actually like ripped me a couple times on some of my draft picks, which I found super interesting. Like I love criticism and hearing different people's opinions. So like I would love to just like shoot the shit with him sometimes and just like go over and be like, like, why are your projections so much different than ours? Like, what do you see in this guy? Like, why? Because there's definitely picks that like I disagree with him, but he just streams so much that's probably why he's got the most points for in the league. So
yeah, I would say too, in my experience with Nate, I don't want to toot this man's horn giggity too much, but he's an amazing streamer. He's just really, really good at that. And and then his player evaluation is good as well. So, I mean, you guys are in the right place, kind of battling it out with you.
Yeah, him and Josh are typically dialed a lot of the time, but I'm curious, like hearing his opinion on players. It's like, it's a little bit different in the way that like I look at people. And so I'm always just open to like new opinions and stuff and learning all the time. So that'd be a cool little pod. Get all the Fantasy Puck and Apple Giginos guys.
Oh, hell yeah. Just, and a bunch of beer.
Oh yeah.
Oh, we got a pre-drink. All right. You can't come onto the pod sober.
A live show.
You got to be half cut by the, once we hit record, then we're really getting some content.
Yeah. Then we can release industry secrets to everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. They can give us their proprietary.
There's a white list of players that you must draft every year.
Yeah, exactly. We've got the information. We got the keys. Shout out to Nate. All right. The man, if anybody could use an ego boost, it's him. So shout out to you, King. Nate, you're a legend. Let's move on. Okay. Next question. Dream Killer. I want to know about Connor Bedard for keeper or dynasty leagues. I have a keep 4 this year, then a keep 5, and then we start over. He has him in a dynasty as well. Do I keep him? What's his outlook? Dream Killer. You got to keep Connor Bedard. I'm sorry to say. I mean, like, this is a guy that is going to be a generational talent to me. And I want to get your take on this here too, Chris, that he's doing what he's doing this year. Like, and last year with a really garbage team. Like, yeah, they made some signings here with Tyler Bertuzzi and Toivo Teravainen, but those are like third line players. Right now, Connor Bedard is playing with Ryan Donato, who I'm not going to talk yang on. He's a good player, but and some guy, I can't even remember the man's name, Landon Crozier or something. I don't even know, some random guy on Chicago, and he's still pacing for 71 points. So where are you at with Connor Bedard? Like, first off, before I kick to you, I think you have to keep Connor Bedard. Like, he's 19 years old. This is a guy that's going through growing pains here in the league, but it's a generational talent. You have to have him on your team. You trust the talent there. You don't want to be on the wrong end of that. Let him go and somebody else pick him up for all those 100-point seasons.
Yeah, like I think where I'm at with Bedard is I have this clip embedded in my head where he just dances through two guys in the neutral zone, creates a 2-on-1, passes it to the left wing to Tyler Bertuzzi, and Tyler Bertuzzi literally shoots the puck in the corner.
Just whiffs it.
He didn't have any intention of even like going forward, but he shoots it into the corner. And I watched that clip and I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, there's no way that you are letting this guy be surrounded with a bunch of middle six to bottom six type forwards. I know Bertuzzi's, I don't know. I agree with you. He's 19 years of age. That's obviously something important to keep in mind. I know there hasn't been an explosive type of season yet. Like, it's a little bit of a different circumstance, I think, with McDavid, just because of, again, the players that he was surrounded with, right? And I know, like, looking at it right now, you're like, okay, this guy's under a point a game by, like, pretty significantly. He's only got, like, 15 goals on the season. His shot rate's gone down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But again, like, if, Chicago's smart, and they go into free agency next year and they throw $16-17 million at Mikko Rantanen, and it's them two lighting up the league next year, the entire situation's different. So typically the advice that I like to give people when it comes to like deciding on keepers is, unless you're 100% getting a player that is a better value, that you can predict into the next season, which a lot of people don't, just wait as long as you can to make that decision. Right? Like, who knows what Chicago's going to do in the offseason? Like, I'm pretty sure they're aware of their current situation. I would be shocked if they just turn a blind eye and do more or less exactly what they did this year. But But again, they understand that they need to put players around this guy that in order to make him successful, they need to kind of build a better lineup around this guy so that he doesn't actually end up leaving the team or wanting to get traded because he's just getting hammered every night. And you hear a lot of his interviews, and this guy does not like to lose.
No, he's a competitor.
Yeah, even recently, like some of the Spit and Chiclet guys were getting on him, and you could like visibly see it. He's like, I don't watch this. I don't care about this. Like, I'm out here to play hockey. Yep. And we love that. So I'm agreeing with you. Like, you 100% keep this guy. You turn a blind eye, and then all of a sudden next year you're going to see him put like 45 at the back of the net with 100 points, and you're just going to be like, why did I ever consider this? So always bet on talent is my kind of mantra.
Absolutely, buddy. Couldn't have said that better myself. I love that take. All right, next question here. Swood says, what do we think of Mika Zibanejad after the Miller trade? Does he have some value potentially as a buy low?
I mean, like, why couldn't they have done this trade like 4 months ago, and then it would have saved my FPPL season? Because
did you hold on to him? You didn't drop him, did you?
Oh no, dude! I looked. I was like, my finger was hovering over the button for like every single day. I was trying my best to like move a guy like this. I'm like, I know, because it's happened to me before with like Kevin Fiala that one year where he was producing at like a 0.7 point per game rate, and then I traded him, and then he just went off and started producing at like
second half Fiala
game. Yeah, it happened to me before. I'll never do it again. Anyways, I knew as soon as I traded him, he was going to go off. But like, I just think it's like a big uptick of having Miller on the power play.
Yep.
And I do think Zib is a pretty decent buy low right now, especially like given where he's at season total wise. Like, if you kind of use that as like your metric to go to a guy and be like, look, like he's been kind of crap the entire season. I'm making a bet that this guy's going to slightly improve. Here's a player that's been consistent. And we just kind of move forward from there. So I do think there is some value in a trade target as a buy low there. Like, again, I don't know the Rangers have a good playoff schedule at the end of the day. Depends on like when your league is. I know for ours, I think it's like week like 21 through 23 or whatever the case is. They don't, like, they're one of the worst ones. So just, again, keep an eye on that, because that should be your main kind of priority when you're making trades right now, is for playoffs. But I think, if it's a decent enough playoff schedule, I would definitely try and buy low.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks for bringing up the playoff schedule there, because that's really important, because you love to take shots at guys that are buy lows for sure. And Zibby is a buy low. I think it's that New York power play. They were terrible, right? And I really think Chris Kreider, who's sort of attached to Zibanejad, he's been playing injured all year. That guy has not been the same player this year. And I don't really believe that it's age-related decline. I think that Kreider is dealing with, I think it was a back injury, right? And he's still like, it's a lingering back injury. So he's not skating well out there. And Zibanejad's kind of, that's a part of it, right? Zibanejad is a great facilitator, and Kreider's a great goal scorer, and it's not happening, and it's certainly not happening for Kreider on the power play. So you bring JT Miller in here. Miller is an excellent power play performer, and he's getting power play 1 right off the bat. They knocked Trocheck down to power play 2, which is super interesting, but makes sense. I thought they might move Kreider down there, but I mean, I guess it doesn't make sense with their construction there. Obviously, you want Kreider net front. He does that, but I think long story short, that playoff schedule is really the main reason why I probably wouldn't be targeting Zibby, because like you said, in your 21 to 23, it's not good. Weeks 22 to 24, it's not good either, right? They play 8 games, 2 off nights. If your playoffs are weeks 23 and 25, 23 to 25, then it gets a little better. It's 11 games with 6 off nights over those weeks. So you definitely check that out. It's not a player I'm targeting, but it's definitely a player that if you held through all this pain and hell, I think, and I did, like that league, my worst league that I was talking about with you as well, I have Zibby on there. Yeah. So, a couple times I'm like, do I drop him? I'm like, no, he's power play 1. Why would I, who am I going to get that's going to give me the potential that Zibanejad does, right? And I think under the hood as well as Zibanejad, it's not terrible. Certainly 5-on-5, he's doing the same things. The power play.
It's funny. My brother keeps telling me that he's going to come back from 4 Nations and just absolutely start lighting it up again once he's like playing with some high level talent like a William Nylander or like an Elias Patterson. And I'm just like, dude, like watching him in game right now in the Rangers is not good.
It's better than it was for sure. And I do think there's a little bit to that, maybe not, to what you're saying there, but like when, I have always noticed, and this is just anecdotal, but a guy goes to the All-Star game, and then comes back. He's got
it's like a little mental reset, a little like
and also
improvement of the vibes overall. Yeah, that's the thing, like confidence for sure.
Like I remember when Besser went there, it's like the Canucks had a garbage team. Like Besser was the all-star, and he comes back and he was playing with a bit of swagger. So I think that there might be a little bit something to that. But I don't know. That's, again, like I said, anecdotal. All right, we got a couple more questions here. I want to respect your time here. I appreciate you sticking out with me here, Chris. This is an interesting one from Zudo. What has been your fantasy hockey podcast listening journey? And I'll expand that. to, YouTube content as well. Like, what sort of content were you consuming that was fantasy related prior to creating FantasyPuck?
It's funny. Like, I really don't think I was doing much outside of like looking at stats. Like, I just kind of looked at things from a kind of like face value perspective and started to form my own opinions, and then from there it got into like, okay, like fantasy hockey magazines. Like, this was really early on, like and then just seeing like different people's opinions and projections as things kind of got like more into when we were working on FantasyPuck and started doing that but like full time, and just seeing like, again, like, what are other people saying about these players? Like, is there anybody specifically that I look to? I always like, for when it comes to fantasy hockey podcasts, I don't really listen to too many outside of like your guys, because of that like long form stuff that you guys do. I just like tap in every once in a while. I'll throw it on.
It's a big investment.
It's not even that. It's good content. Like, I look forward to it genuinely. And then just outside of that, I think one of the most beneficial ones that anybody could listen to, like even if they're just like a fan of hockey, is the 32 Thoughts podcast with Elliot Friedman and Kyle Bukowskis now. Especially around like the trade deadline time, when they're starting to like tell you all the rumors in terms of like player movement and so on and so forth. Like, you can kind of get a little bit ahead of the curve there as to like, okay, like maybe Dylan Cousins is actually looking like he's headed to Ottawa, for example. It's like, do I think that's going to help fantasy related stuff, so on and so forth. So it's like just being tapped into that on a weekly basis. It's like twice a week. That's really like my main kind of podcast I listen to just keep up with NHL news as well. But in terms of like fantasy hockey stuff, it's not a lot. Like, I'll touch base with a lot of different creators and so on and so forth. Like, I like data drafts content as well too. It's very analytical. It's very numbers based. It just depends on like what you prefer to consume. I feel like our content is a little bit less analytical and more so just like opportunity, and like a lot to do with like, where they're sitting in lineups and like average time on ice, and just using projections alongside like, what we're seeing from like a rates perspective. But again, it depends on what you like to consume. So for me, it's just like, I like to be tapped in as to everything that's happening in the NHL standpoint, which is why I like my primary podcast is 32 Thoughts, and then fantasy hockey stuff just kind of just like periodically when I can get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I'm hearing there is Apples and Ginos is your favorite fantasy hockey podcast, and that's what I'm taking from that, buddy. You know what? I like what you said about your own content. That you said that maybe you don't focus on the analytics as much, but I think you guys do that in the background, and then what you present is like kind of a short form content.
Yeah, like I think it's
like
very rare that we get to a point where we're not like justifying our point with data, because I just think like that's the number one thing that you can account on is that like we're seeing this rate change, we're seeing this and so forth. It's just like, I was just saying, it's not like as in depth as some of the stuff that like Data Draft does, for example, where he's pulling like all of these crazy analytical numbers. And I know you guys are love like the individual scoring metrics and so on and so forth as well, which is always curious to hear. And like any type of different perspective is a good perspective, I think. But yeah, like I'm just usually tapped into the NHL news and what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely, buddy. I always love what you guys bring to the table, like 15-minute video, and you can tell that it's based in all the stuff that I'm interested in. It's just you might not be like, you've kind of condensed it down into a really palatable form. So kudos to FantasyPuck. For me personally, my podcast journey, I listened to NBA fantasy podcasts before I ever listened to fantasy hockey. So I listened to an amazing guy. Shout this man out, Dan Besbris. He does Fantasy NBA Today. Now he did that with a company, and now he does one called Old Man Squad basketball podcast. The guy's a legend. He's one of the best podcasters out there. So shout out to him. But yeah, once I listened to that, I started to think that I could potentially do that. And then Apples and Ginos was the first one that I sort of found, and I got in touch with Nate pretty quick and made that happen. But I do like one that I listened to a lot, especially back in the day, Five Hole Fantasy podcast. Listened to it quite a bit. They had some amazing draft episodes, positional ranking, stuff like that. Really into it. Great stuff. Keeping Karlsson, I listen to that because I like the Keeping Karlsson fantasy league, which I'm in. It's one of my favorites. What else? I mean, yeah, I love it. You shouted out 32 Thoughts as well, because something that I find there's a gap in terms of the information that we're trying to provide is like the mental aspect or what's going on in the dressing room, right? Like, what are you hearing about this dressing room and what's the situation? Like, why does this player want to leave? And like, you can take that information and sort of bake it into some of the situation and deployment, right? Like even just the Miller and Pedersen stuff that went on here in Vancouver. It's like, yeah, that was all out there for everybody to hear, but just an example of like, okay, this is probably affecting these players and their point production, right? So for now, like I'm not really interested in moving on these players. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just little things like that I like about the 32 Thoughts. And I also want to shout out the PDO cast with Dmitry Filipovich. Like that to me that's where my head's at these days in terms of hockey, like learning about hockey systems and how players are breaking the puck out, like what makes a good power play.
Yeah.
How is a line constructed? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of my go-to podcast right now. I want to shout out the PDO cast. You ever check that one out?
I haven't actually. I'll have to do that. That sounds like really right up my alley too. Like I love learning about all the intricate kind of stuff that like you don't pay attention to and they can pick up on from like a face value.
You'd love it, man, because they don't go like super deep into the analytics, but you know that that's their background. So it's kind of similar to what you guys do. It's like they have the background, but then what they present is like just kind of a really palatable version of this stuff. And these are insiders that know what they're talking about. So anyway, shout out that podcast there. Anyways, let's move on here. Are you good for time, my man? I got a couple.
Oh yeah, dude, whatever you want. I'm chilling if you're not in a rush.
You're a damn legend. Oh my God. I'm getting hypnotized by just staring at this beautiful mustache right at my face. I'm losing, I'm digressing on a bunch of crap here. Anyways, sorry about this. All right. Next question. Fred Z says bullish on the Tinkly Winkly man. That's what I call Morgan Frost as his like Morgan Frost to me sounds like a villain's, name before he becomes the villain. And so Morgan Frost is his, regular name. And then the Tinkly Winkly man is the villain that he becomes. So that's the explanation there.
Gotcha.
And yeah, I'm sorry about this. Morgan Frost. Talk to me about Morgan Frost. Do you have any interest in him for fantasy?
It's kind of the same situation as Filip Chytil. I think I need a little bit more of a sample to see like what kind of his role is in Calgary. Mm-hmm. They seem to love Kadri on that top line. Like he's the number one guy. Like Joel Fehervary is slotted in that top line as well too. So like there's arguably a little bit more interest on my end just because of that. And then obviously like how he fits into like power play. Like he's obviously on the top power play unit where Fehervary isn't. So again, like just looking at their lineup, like you'd think he should be in their top six. They currently have Backlund with like Coleman and Coronado, and then it's Sharangovich, Frost, Pospisil. So again, like in terms of his line mates, like unless Sharangovich just turns the clock back to last year where he's on like a 30-goal pace all of a sudden, and Frost is just facilitating that a lot of the time. But again, I'm very much whenever like a trade happens that doesn't involve like a big name player, for example, like I think you can look at objectively JT Miller being on the Rangers and saying like this is a perfect fit. He's fantastic. He's had a great start. And even though like Rantanen has a super hot start to like Carolina on paper, you're like, okay, this guy's playing still with Aho. Like, yeah, he loses out on McKinnon, but it's still like a good top line. Like you could end up with like Aho, Svetch. He should absolutely pop off. But I think like with Frost, like it's just kind of like he's one of these mid-tier players where I just need to see like, okay, is it actually worth grabbing him? And like I definitely don't think I'm trading for him right now, if that makes sense. So just kind of like keep at arm's length for right now up until I see something that I really feel is worth adding.
Give us your best Tinkly Winkly man. Let me hear Chris from FantasyPuck.
Tinkly Winkly.
Oh yeah, buddy, he's the Tinkly Winkly man, Morgan Frost, aka the Tinkly Winkly man. Okay, yeah. For me, like I don't see this as a big upgrade from what he was doing on the Flyers. Like he was getting power play one time on the Flyers as well occasionally. So, I see it kind of as a lateral move for sure in terms of his fantasy value. And he was a streamer before. So I think he's still a streamer here, but it's a streamer with power play one, right? Currently. And he's not playing under Torts anymore, which, you know, that is,
I think is, you could argue is a bump, right? Like more consistent ice time.
Absolutely. You can add, it's definitely a bump. So I'm watching the player, but like you said, I need a bigger sample size, and Calgary as an offensive juggernaut. No. Okay. They're really bad when it comes to putting the biscuit in the basket. I mean, I'm looking at some stats here at 5-on-5. Their expected goals for is 27th overall in the league, and their actual goals for worse, 31st.
Wow.
Okay, so they don't do that, but they have really improved defensively. So I will shout out the Flames there. That's kind of what's holding them in the game here. So hopefully Frost can help them with their kind of struggling offense. But I'm not, he's not a must-add by any means. So, anyways, shout out to the Tinkly Winkly man. We gotta talk about Kevin Lankinen. Okay, is Lankinen a drop, even though he has a good playoff schedule, and what's the split between him and Demko moving forward? What do you think, my man?
So I think they've kind of eased Demko in at this point. I'm not convinced that he's gonna really go to the rates at which he was at before his injury in terms of like the volume. So like I think Lankinen still has some value there. I don't necessarily think he's a drop. His volume's definitely gone down. I think if you're in a points league, like if there's better options available on the waiver wire, like by all means. Demko started like 4 of the last 5. So it's starting to kind of lean towards that volume, and his numbers have been getting better as well. So I think they're kind of like coming to the realization that like he's a little bit warmed up now. We're starting to play him more. He's able to handle it. Like there's no really concern with his injury. So I think that like it should, in my opinion, I think going forward it'll be like a 65, like 35 kind of split, something along those lines. I don't think it's quite like 70-30, but I think I'll be surprised a little bit with Lankinen moving forward as to how many starts he gets. Because I still think like they're conscious of the fact that, this injury is pretty much, to my understanding, is a long-term concern as well. Mm-hmm. So just trying to ease Demko back in. I think if you get to the point where like it's Demko's net for like, like let's say he starts like 9 of the next 10 games and you only see Lankinen start a back-to-back, like at that point, then you're like, okay, like you can drop him.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think, the playoff schedule is not a reason to hold Lankinen, in my opinion, because of the split that they're going to be doing. And for me, I'm in the same boat as you. I think it's like 60-40, 65-35. Probably I could see them going 2 games Demko, 1 game Lankinen moving forward, right? So to me, I think that's droppable, right? Like I think Lankinen is droppable for sure. Like he's a great goalie to pick up for streaming, like and how we do it here at Apples and Ginos. If you can get a goalie in for 2 starts a week, then that's a goal you should have on your team. But if you're not, then bounce him. You don't need to have him on your roster, right? So I would sort of treat Lankinen the way I would treat Charlie Lindgren. I think they're kind of in a similar situation there. I think Logan Thompson has the 1A, Lindgren has the 1B. So that's sort of what it's looking like. And I do think Demko, like they're obviously aware of his injury and they want to have him fresh for the playoffs. If the Canucks can make it there, my God.
I know it's they're losing steam fast.
It's just so painful, but they've won 3 in a row. So, that's well, no, they won 2 in a row. What the hell? I'm just, trying to project another win for them. But I think Lankinen could get some run there in your playoff time. So maybe drop him and then pick him up again come playoff time if it makes sense. All right. Last couple here. Drysaddle asks, I noticed Chris from FantasyPuck bakes into his projections injury history. How do you go about that? And so I'd love to get your take there real quick, and then I'll give my quick take.
Yeah, I think injuries is obviously like I wouldn't say it's a hot topic, but it's something a lot of people ask, especially when it comes to projections. It's like, should I account for people's injuries? Is that actually something that you can predict? And I think that the philosophy that at least like FantasyPuck has is that you can't necessarily predict injuries, but there are guys on a consistent basis that are injured more than others. And so, like, it was McKinnon up until, like, 2 years ago. Like, Matthews, you could make an argument. Like, I think Barkov's a great example, right? Where it's, like, it's just a guy that, like, produces at a really good per-game rate. But then he has, like, 10 to 15 games where he misses at least every single year. Like, Malkin's another great example with that as well. And so the way that we kind of go about that is we just use a weighted average within like a certain amount of like 3-4 seasons, for example, where we go back and we look at historical data, we create a weighted average. Sometimes it gets some pretty interesting results where it's like a guy's only projected for like 60 games and we have to like go in and tweak that, obviously. But for the most part, it's meant to represent the fact that like, okay, like, yes, like this is a really good per game player, but he does have some injury concerns with him. It's just something to flag. And it's like you look at a situation where, like, say you're in like round 3, for example, and you're having to pick between like Barkov and Braden Point, and you know that like they more or less produce at a per game rate that's very similar, but you know that Point's really consistently healthy. You want to go with Point over Barkov. And I think that's the purpose of really factoring in injuries into projections and so on and so forth.
Yep. No, that's an interesting point. We don't bake in the injuries here into our projections. We always project for an 82 game pace and then sort of leave it to the listener to kind of extrapolate what they want to do there. But for me, it's hard. Like injuries are so individual, right?
For sure.
Like, a guy like Aaron Ekblad, for instance, like the guy's had multiple injuries that are all to different parts of the body. Like one of his injuries, he fell down the stairs and like hurt his hamstring. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't predict that. And so one of the things I really don't want to miss out on is players having amazing seasons because I didn't draft them because they're injury prone. Guys like Crosby, right? Guys like Malkin who had amazing seasons. Like you said, McKinnon, Barkov, those are players like Carlson, his 100-point season. That's another guy where you're like, I'm not drafting Carlson. So to me, like, unless there's an injury that's like to the same part of the body, like a guy like Mark Stone, that's a guy that I'm always kind of like, I'm not interested unless it's at extreme value, right?
Yeah.
And I did get Mark Stone in one spot this year after pick 200.
Great.
What the hell?
Fantastic.
That was insane. Although I'm getting caved in on that league, so he's not really helping me out. But because
I think in some circumstances, and I think like Jack Eichel is a good example of this as well too, where it's like you look at this guy's like history and he hasn't played over 75 games since like 2018, 2019, but he produces at a really high rate. And again, I think the context of the injury also matters. Like with him, it's like, okay, he went through the surgery process, he played, didn't have any more issues beyond the surgery process, but our projections obviously bake that in. It's like I'm it's a little bit more up to interpretation. It's like I understand that like this is obviously a really good player and somebody that you should target because there hasn't been any concern for his injury history further beyond that. But then you look at a guy like I use Barkov a lot for this example, but like he just consistently gets hurt every year, and he misses like 10 to 15 games like it's clockwork. And it's just like at this point, I understand, like, okay, like he's just one of these guys that plays like 70 games, 75 games, whatever the case is. And it's like, I'm looking at that. I'm like, okay, what happens if that injury happens during my fantasy hockey playoffs and I just don't have my third round pick there, where I could have gone with a Braden Point, for example. And so I'm completely in agreement with you where it's like, I don't think you're able to predict injuries, but I think there is some historical data that shows that some players are just more injury prone.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting piece. I'd be interested to look at that as well and kind of see like a correlation from year to year. But one of the things I definitely do avoid though is players that are injured through training camp. That's different for me. Like a guy like Jason Robertson was a guy that I was not really that high on going into the season because he was dealing with that foot injury, right? And he had a massively slow start. Another good example was Matt Tkachuk last year. Like coming off the sternum, the broken sternum, right? Brandon Martier with the Panthers, like shouldered whatever he was dealing with. Like they had really slow starts, and so that's something that I'm keeping an eye on. But that's very much like specific to what they're dealing with. So yeah, I don't know. Injuries are an interesting one, man. And I just always, like we've talked about, kind of trusting the player. And that's sort of my mantra when it comes to that. Although I really like your point about using it as a tiebreaker, right? If you got two guys and buddy hasn't played a full season in like 5 years, you're like, all right, I'll go here, right? I mean, it's just helpful in terms of making decisions. And I can definitely get on board with that. All right, buddy. We're almost done. All right. Buddy here asks, I'm in a Bangers Cats league that includes Pimps. He only has 2 IR plus spots, and he's got Nichushkin, Marchenko, Barzal, and Monahan all injured. He's assuming Nichushkin comes back after 4 Nations, which I think he will. Should he drop one of his injured guys or keep trying to win down 1 roster spot? And he says he's in first place as well, so he can absorb a couple losses. What do you think about that? We're looking at Nuke, Marchenko, Barzal, and Monahan.
Yeah, I think with the current situation, I wouldn't be too concerned about Nichushkin. I think he's fine after 4 Nations has kind of been like publicly made aware that like he's going to join the team after he's back. Barzal is a little bit more of a different circumstance. You have 2 IR spots, so I would have Barzal and Marchenko in those IR spots. I think you could probably find a better replacement for Monahan. Fantilli's been fantastic on that top line, like with Marchenko, without Marchenko. He continues to produce whenever he's been seeing that ice time. So I'd be curious as to what that deployment looks like once Monahan's back, whether they keep him in that role or not. Again, a lot of question marks surrounding that. But in terms of the fact that you have 2 IR spots, roughly how long Marchenko is going to be out for. you don't know how long Barzal's going to be out for. They're not really players that you can drop either, given their seasons. So I would have those two on IR. I'd be confident that Nichushkin comes back, and then I'd maybe find a replacement for Monahan.
Yep, that's right where I'm at too. I think Monahan is your drop. I'm not too concerned there about dropping Monahan, although he was playing amazing. I think that was a lot to do with Marchenko. Honestly, this guy is playing unreal this year. Not to downplay Monahan's achievements, but I also think that Columbus could be a different team when Monahan returns, which is supposed to be in mid-March. I think like Columbus has a bunch of cap space. They're looking at playoffs. They're trying to get in. I could see them making a big splash and bringing a player in here, and Monahan would be coming back to potentially a different team. Plus, like you said, he's doing very well in that role. And do they just bump him back down again after this? Like, I'm not so sure about that. So definitely keep those Barzal and Marchenko. Barzal, like we still don't have enough information with that player. He could be done for the season. He could come back after Four Nations. So he was injured blocking his shot. So the fact that he's, they haven't said anything makes me think like something's broken. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what happened there, but I think you still have to keep him until we hear more. So there you go. Moving on, over on X here, we got a question about Barrett Hayton. Is Barrett Hayton a hold, and what's up with Logan Cooley? I'll give you my 2 cents there. Hayton is definitely a hold. You got to hold on to Barrett Hayton. I mean, unless, like we talked about Utah having that 2-game schedule, like you could drop Hayton for that and pick up a player that has 4 games. That makes total sense. But yeah, I'm trying to hold on to Barrett Hayton. This guy's popping off at the moment. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, he had a really good start to the season as well when he was kind of skating on that top line alongside Schmaltz and Keller. Yeah. And I think that's the catalyst at the end of the day, right? Like it's who is on that top line center role. We know Cooley is going to be out for a little bit now. I don't know what that timeline looks like exactly. Like injuries are always tricky. Yeah, like sometimes they're a lot sooner, sometimes they're a lot later. But as long as he's skating on that top line, like it just in the past 4 games, like well over 18 minutes average time on ice, he's got 3 points. He's not really a huge goal scoring threat. He's more of a playmaker, like very similar to like what Cooley is, even though Cooley's, I feel like, a little bit more of a goal scoring threat, and his shot volumes are pretty decent as well this year. But yeah, like I would look to hold Hayden for as long as possible, as long as he keeps that top line spot. I think that's a great add, especially in deeper leagues where you can get to a guy like that. And yeah, as long like the ice time speaks for itself. It's like whenever he's seeing like close to 18 minutes, like I look back to the start of the season, he had like a really hot start when he was getting that top line role. So I'd definitely hold on to him.
Yeah, the neat thing with Barrett Hayton, he's moving up and down the lineup. Right now he's playing with the Italian stallion, Michael Carcone. All right, and Dylan Guenther, who's
really? They don't have him on the top line?
No, they got Kerfoot up there. Which will make sense. I don't know, but Dylan Guenther, this guy's been shot out of a cannon.
Oh, dude, I love him so much.
He's incredible.
I'm so happy I got to him in a couple leagues. We were super high on him this year. Super happy with the production that we see. Like I think he can be a 40 goal scorer. It's maybe even as soon as this year. But I think next year, like this guy's going to be so sick. They're gonna play him with Keller eventually, and like Cooley's even taking a step this year too. So this team is starting to look like a real offensive threat with some of the talent they have.
It's a fun team for sure. And one thing I love about Guenther, just as an aside, this guy's played 2 games of over 20 minutes. That's not what he was doing before he got injured, folks. He was playing like 14 minutes, still popping off, but now he's getting 20 minutes. This guy's shooting like 6 shots a game, 7
shots the game before, 7 shots last game.
God, and 2 game winners. Like, geez. Hey, this man's a legend, but Hayton's playing with him. So, and one of the things I wanted to shout out about Hayton is his individual scoring chances are great. Like in the last 5 games, he's 10th overall in the entire league in that. So, So they're cooking together, him and Guenther. And then he's 30th overall in the entire league on the season. Barrett Hayton.
Really?
So he's generating a lot of chances. He's getting a lot of individual chances himself. And that's according to Natural Stat Trick. But the more chances you get, the better chance you have to score, right? And if you look at Barrett Hayton's shooting percentage, 12.6, I mean, that's reasonable, right? But the on-ice shooting percentage, 9.6 on the season, no, that should go up, right? Especially now that Guenther is back in the lineup and they're playing together. Buddy, Barrett Hayton's going to cook, and I'm here for it. Let's not go crazy. I mean, maybe like a 60-point pace, 55, 60-point pace for Barrett Hayton. That's how I'm valuing him. All right, last question, my man. It's a beefer episode. Chris, thank you for your service. We got to talk about Ryan Nugent Hopkins. LA Frankie over on Blue Sky asks, is RNH a streamer at this point? Third line inconsistent scoring. Better to replace with a hot stream. Giggity. A hot stream. It sounds weird. Or hold RNH. What do you think about RNH, and where are you at with the player?
I just think the 104-point season was an outlier. Like it happens, especially like when you're surrounded by a guy like Connor McDavid. We've seen Leon Draisaitl really take the reins this season. I feel like I've heard more of Draisaitl's name than I have McDavid this year. And yeah, it just seems like Nuge is just kind of like a depth piece at this point. They kind of, again, shuffle him around the lineup and in the top six and kind of move him around. And it's been surprising because I feel like, now that I look at their lineup, like there's a definite hole at third C for them. Mm-hmm. Like they brought in a lot of wingers this year, and they've kind of handcuffed themselves in that sense, unless you're putting Adam Henrique as like your third C and then bringing up somebody. But it's not like guys like Connor Brown, Jeff Skinner, or Arvidsson are going to be able to slot into like a center role, or even Vasily Podkolzin. So I think he's just kind of stuck in that spot. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't really get the opportunity to move up in the lineup, which is, I feel like would really benefit the Oilers because all of these wingers that they brought in this year were struggling, right? Like Jeff Skinner hasn't been good. Like Victor Arvidsson has not been great. Like Podkolzin, like you're telling me that's like your top six right winger? Like yeah. I don't. It's like they need somebody in there to kind of like juice up the mix a little bit. He's still getting power play one time. Like, I think that's the only thing that where I'm like kind of looking at that and it's like, okay, that's really your saving grace.
Yep.
But he's just been so bad in terms of his production this year. Like, even in the last, his last 10 games haven't been terrible now that I'm looking at it. And he is getting some ice time where he's over like 19 minutes. I'm curious though. I feel like if you can move him, you're better off. It looks like his second half has been a lot better than his first half. Like, I think he had like 2 points in his first 20 games. 2 goals in his first 20 games. Which is, yeah, like, and he's not really known to be a shooter or anything like that, but I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a draw. I guess it depends on your league size. He's got 9 points his last 11 games. Doesn't really shoot the puck too much. He's not a really like sexy player to get excited about in your lineup. But if you're in a deeper league, like obviously hang on to him, don't drop him. If you're in a more shallower league, if there's better options available, by all means, it's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think I agree with that. Like 14-teamer, you're keeping Nuge, no question. But 12-teamer, are you keeping him in a 12-teamer?
I think it depends on the lineup and the league settings. If it's one of these ones that aren't as like shot heavy, for example, I think he's fine just because of like he'll chip you in a point every once in a while, and like sometimes he will just go off for like 3 points, just circumstance of him being on the top power play in Edmonton.
Yep.
So I guess it depends, and I think there's some value for him in like categories leagues because he's like dual eligible as well, and he'll like rack up some power play points for you or power play assists or assists in general. Yep. So I guess it's a kind of dependent on what's available in your waiver wire for a 12-teamer.
Isn't that crazy? This guy got 104 points. Like, damn, he had 53 power play points. That power play went nuclear, just went off the rails. But I mean, to me with Nuge, I think I'm probably holding, but if you have to drop, I'm fine with that too. To me, it's like you're keeping him, like you said, for that power play exposure, right? But I was digging in a little bit on his metrics there on the power play, and him and Zach Hyman, they really aren't touching the puck out there on the power play. They're at the end of passes, right? Well, Bouchard, McDavid, and Draisaitl, they work it around, right? So it's his role on the power play is muted. It's not like it was in 22-23 where he got 53 points, right? It's like,
it's like how frustrated are you with this guy based off of where you drafted him, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, if I spent like a anywhere before like a 10th round pick on this guy, then I'm pretty upset about it. But it's like it just depends. Like I find like the manager, it's like different. It's like, okay, like would you drop Elias Pettersson, right? Like I don't think I would do that because I still see him as a very talented piece that can just start to like turn around at a moment's notice, especially after like a little reset at the Four Nations.
Yep.
But somebody actually did drop Elias Pettersson in our Creators League. It was
what?
Yeah, it was New Jersey Injury Ninjas.
He dropped
Chris Wassell. Yep. So you can find that guy on Twitter at Chris Wassell and be.
I know Chris.
Chris is a good guy. Chris is a good guy.
Chris, what are you doing, my man? You got to keep Petey on the teamie. Okay.
And he didn't. He didn't even add anybody. Like I don't know if it was like a genuine mistake, and because he hasn't made any moves since then.
Was it defenseman Elias Pettersson? Like, please.
I double checked.
Oh,
I was like, it's probably defenseman Elias Pettersson, and then I'm like, I should check just to be sure. So I have a waiver claim in for him right now.
Yeah,
but,
I hope you get it, my man. You know what that takes? Cojones. All right. Shout out to you, Chris. Just cutting bait on Petey. Yeah, I don't know if I do that, but that's an interesting comparison though, Petey and Nuge. I think the big difference there is that Pettersson is relied on to carry the offense and play.
He's like a number one guy on the team where Nuge is like
Nuge is a supplement.
Pony.
Yeah, he's a supplement there. So that's the big difference there. Also should say Edmonton in weeks 22 to 24, they've got a really crappy schedule, 9 games, 1 off night. So I mean, you could probably do a lot better than Nuge. I see him, capping out at like 60-point pace moving forward. So that's my 2 cents there, buddy. That's it for the Mailbag Show. We did it. It was a beefer. And before we go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about FantasyPuck. And first off, do you guys over at FantasyPuck, do you guys ever cross the streams? You know what I'm talking about here, Chris?
What do you mean by that?
This is where you go out with your buddies out to a beautiful lake, right? You're staring out at the lake. You look at the mountains, the sun's rising or setting, whatever time you get there, and you basically just cross the streams right into the lake. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you guys ever do that?
I think there might have been a couple times. A lot of us are actually like good friends from university, so there's definitely a couple circumstances I feel like over the university career that could have happened. I can neither confirm nor deny, but
buddy,
I'd say it's on the table.
I love to hear this. All right, Chris, that's excellent because Nate and I cross the streams all the time, and it feels great. It's just nice to, it's a nice way to connect with your buddies, and hopefully one day maybe the Apples and Geno's FantasyPuck, we can all cross the streams together. What do you say about that?
Sure, man. Yeah.
Oh, damn. Okay, that's a verbal contract. Anyways, Chris, why don't you, before I let you go, give us your socials, talk to us about FantasyPuck and what we can expect from you for the rest of the season, and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, if you guys want to check us out on YouTube, it's at FantasyPuck. We do weekly streaming content, must adds, must drops, playoff schedule, weekly schedule, everything that you guys want out of a fantasy hockey channel, we provide you. And if you want to find me on Twitter, my Twitter is at ChrisCharlton29. But if not, go check out our FantasyPuck Twitter. That is at FantasyPuck. Again, you can find us there. We have a lot of other premium options as well, including a Patreon that does in-season projections as well, and playoff schedules and all of that good stuff. Very similar to what you get out of the Apples and Geno's crew here. But feel free to check us out. And we would love to have you in our Discord as well, where there's a ton of people, so much to where it's hard for me to even keep up these days.
Yeah, you guys got a great Discord. And definitely. I'll put that Discord link in the description as well. You can never have too many Discords. You got to get in there. There's people talking fantasy hockey all the time. Chris, thank you so much, man. Thanks for being here. It's always fun. I always, get a lot out of our conversation. So I appreciate you, my man. But that's all we got, folks. That was our Mailbag Show. Nate and I are going to do a special edition 4 Nations Cup podcast. We're going to try stuff. I don't know. Nate's going to get the biz on a show sheet, and we're going to see what's what. We're going to talk about the different rosters and, our predictions and stuff. We might do a draft as well. So anyways, yeah, that's what we're doing, man.
If you need an extra body for that, let me know.
Hey, actually, if you guys need extra, you got 7 people. Get Nate and I in there. Let's go. Let's put some real money up. All right, $100 minimum buy-in.
Okay.
Are you in with it? Chris,
sure.
That's another verbal contract. All right, sweet. But that's it, folks. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, celebrate your day. Bye for now.